Hello everyone, so in this video I'm going to discuss theory and the numericals that can be asked from the chapter semiconductors in JEE Mains 2025. As far as weightage is concerned, so around 2 questions can be asked from this chapter, so it's a must to do topic. And if you look at the syllabus, so we have to focus on these areas like semiconductors, diodes, then IV characteristic in forward and reverse biased, and diode has rectifier, IV characteristics of LED, photodiode, solar cell, then Zener diode, and the Zener diode as a voltage regulator, and then the logic gates. Let's begin. So in today's world, if we talk about any electronic device, all these devices use semiconductors extensively. So that's why it becomes a very important topic, right? So why we are using it so extensively in all these devices? The reason is we can alter conductivity of the semiconductor by different techniques. So let us see. So how we can define semiconductor? So there is a crude definition. We can say the conductivity of the semiconductor lies between the metals and the non-metals. So I can say the conductivity of metal will be greater than the conductivity of semiconductor, and that will be greater than the conductivity of non-metals, right? Right. So, and how the conductivity changes if we increase the temperature of semiconductor? As we know, in metals, what happens? If you increase the temperature, the resistance increases, conductivity decreases, but that is not the case in semiconductor. If you increase the temperature, the resistance decreases and the conductivity increases, right? So we can say in case of semiconductor, the thermal coefficient of resistance is negative. So negative thermal coefficient of resistance, right? So we can say as temperature increases, the conductivity increases in case of semiconductors, right? So that is the property, right? So if you increase the temperature, conductivity increases, right? And there are certain methods with which we can alter the conductivity of semiconductors. So that is the reason we use them extensively in all electronic devices, because we can alter conductivity. So there are various ways. One will be by giving energy in the form of photons, or by changing the temperature, or by replacing some of the semiconductor atoms with some other atoms. We'll see in extrinsic semiconductor, if we replace silicon with aluminum or silicon with phosphorus, we can alter the conductivity, right? So to understand that how the conductivity is changing, we should understand how the electron is bonded to the atom. So let's see. So in an isolated atom, what is happening? So we have a nucleus and there is a single electron, let us say, which is orbiting around the nucleus. So when we have two charged particles interacting with one another, there has to be some potential energy. So do you know what is the formula of potential energy? Yes, we all studied that in electrostatics. If there are two charges, then the potential energy of the system is given as k q1 q2 by r, where r is the distance between the two charged particles. So here we have a positively charged nucleus and there is an electron which is orbiting around the nucleus, right? In a fixed energy level, let us say. And there is a Coulomb attraction, and due to that, it is able to move in a circular path. Now, if we plot the graph of potential energy with the distance from the nucleus, let us plot the graph. So on the x-axis, I'm showing the distance, and on the y-axis, I'm showing the potential energy. And since electron is negatively charged particles, the potential energy will come out to be negative. So if I plot the graph, it will look like this, right? On both sides of the nucleus, to the left, to the right, the graph will look like this. Can you see, as the distance of the electron from the nucleus increases, the energy also increases. So as r increases, u also increases. So I can say, if we have a 1s orbital, the energy will be something like this. So this is r for 1s, and this is the energy of 1s orbital, right? U of 1s. Similarly, as we increase the distance, say this is 2s, right? R for 2s, and this will be the energy for 2s. So like this, the energy is increasing as we increase the distance. Now this is a very simple situation. But what happens if we have two atoms? If I show the orbitals, so this is 1s, 2s, 2p for the first atom, and this is 1s, 2s, and 2p for the second atom. Now let us see, there is a common point on 2p, right, for both the atoms. So this, let us consider this point is A. Now this point is equidistant from both the atoms, right? So its distance, let us say, is r from both the atoms. So we can say, if the electron is at A, it is equally attracted by both the nucleus. If that is the case, we can say this electron can move from one atom to another atom. Or if we consider an electron which is in an orbital which is having energy greater than 2p, then that atom is again bonded with both the atoms. So the electron which is in 2p of first atom, it can move from one atom to another atom. So this electron can move from one atom to another atom and like this, it will take part in the conduction process. So such electrons are known as conduction electrons. So I can show this in this diagram. So the electrons which is having energy greater than, let us say, this 2p energy, they will take part in the conduction process. And this band, kind of a band, so we have a range of energy. So when we have a range of energies, it is called a band, and this band is known as conduction band. Okay, so again, it is a simple case, but what happens if we have a lattice which has trillions of atoms? So let us see. So in a lattice, again, we can say the electron which is having sufficient energy, they can move from one atom to another atom and take part in the conduction process. So I'm taking an electron which can move from one atom to the another atom and can move throughout the lattice. So if you exert some external field, let us say, then the electron will experience force opposite to the electric field and they can move in that particular direction. So let us say if we exert an external field in the right direction, the electron, a conduction electron, will move in the opposite direction and take part in the conduction process. So the shaded band, this band is again a conduction band. So that we have to remember. Okay. So here a single electron is bonded with multiple atoms or multiple nucleus. So in isolated atom, we have discrete energy levels, but if we have more than one atoms, then the discrete energy level system will be violated, will be having bands instead of discrete values. So I can show it like this. Let us say this is 1s orbital, this is 2s, 2p, 3s, 3p. So 1s will be having a range of energies which is known as a band, right? So this will be 1s band, 2s band, 2p, 3s band, 3p band, like this. So let us take an example of sodium, right? So in sodium, if I write down the electronic configuration, it is 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, 3s1. So we can say 1s orbital is completely filled, 2s is filled, 2p is filled, right? And 3s is partially filled. So if I take a hypothetical scenario, let us say at 0 Kelvin, right? At 0 Kelvin, the maximum energy possessed by the electron is what? I can say this is the maximum energy, right? Possessed by the electron. Now this energy level is known as Fermi energy level. So at 0 Kelvin, maximum energy possessed by an electron is called Fermi energy, right? Okay, so what happens? Suppose if we increase the temperature. If we increase the temperature, then there will be electrons which will be having energy greater than Fermi energy level. So as temperature increases, electron energy, so there will be some electron which will be having energy greater than Fermi energy. And if I consider the valence shell, this 3s orbital, right? So the electrons which is having energy in the 3s orbital, those electrons are known as valenced electrons. And the energies of valence electron constitute another band which is known as valence band. So valence band, it contains energies of valenced electrons, right? So you must be wondering why we are studying these band diagrams and how we can compare conductivity of metals, non-metals by understanding these bands. So let us see. So let me first start with the metals. So in metals, if I show the conduction band and the valence band, so this one is, the yellow one is the conduction band and the white one is the valence band. Can you see there is an overlap? So we can say there is an overlap in conduction band and valence band. So what does it mean? So there are already electrons in the valence band which are taking part in the conduction process, and there will be some electrons which are not in conduction band, but they will gain energy and can easily move to the conduction band and take part in the conduction process. So we can say in metals we have large number of conduction electron, hence the conductivity is huge. But what happens in non-metal? So in non-metal there is no overlap, right? No overlap. So there is a gap, and this gap is known as forbidden energy gap. Forbidden energy gap, or we can also call it a band gap. So, and this delta Eg in case of non-metal is greater than 5 electron volt, and it will be very difficult for the electrons to gain this energy from the temperature, right? So they cannot attain this energy if you increase the temperature. So that's why there are hardly any electrons which are in the conduction band which can take part in the conduction process. So that's why the conductivity of non-metal is poor. So you can say hardly any electron in conduction band to take part in conduction process. Take part in conduction process. So that we have to remember. Now let us see what happens in the semiconductor. So in semiconductor still there is a gap, but this gap is not as huge as the case in the non-metal. This gap is less. So here the delta Ag is less than 2 electron volt. Now the electron, they can attain energy at room temperature and they can jump to the conduction band. So the electrons in the conduction band can increase at the room temperature, or even if you increase the temperature beyond room temperature. So what is happening here? So when electron moves from the valence band to the conduction band, we have free electrons or conduction electrons which can take part in the conduction process. And there is one more thing happening in semiconductor. When electron jumps from valence to conduction, there is a vacancy created in the valence band which is known as hole. So there is a vacancy. Hole is the vacancy created in valence band when electron moves to conduction band. We'll see in the later part of the video, these holes will also take part in the conduction process. So in semiconductor, conduction happens in two ways. One by the free electrons in the conduction band and the holes in the valence band. So here conduction happens in two ways. First by free electrons in conduction band, second holes in valence band. Okay, so now let us see the different types of semiconductors that we have to study. So we can categorize semiconductor as intrinsic and extrinsic. What are intrinsic semiconductors? These are pure semiconductors. Pure semiconductors like silicon, germanium, etc. Right? And what are extrinsic? So what are extrinsic? Basically, if you do some addition of impurities, if we add some impurities to a pure semiconductor, we'll get an extrinsic semiconductor. So we can say pure semiconductor with added impurities is called extrinsic semiconductor. So we'll study two types of semiconductor, two types of extrinsic semiconductor. One is N-type, another is P-type. How we can form N-type? We can form N-type by using pentavalent impurities like phosphorus. And we can form P-type semiconductor by using trivalent impurities, say aluminum, right? Okay, now let us see what is an intrinsic semiconductor. So a single silicon atom is bonded with 4 neighboring silicon atoms. So if I consider this silicon, it is bonded with 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now what happens as the temperature is increased, some bonds will break. So as the temperature increases, some bonds will break. So let us say this bond breaks first, right? If this breaks, let us say this electron will come out. Now this electron will move to the conduction band. And when bond breaks, there is another thing happening. There is a vacancy created, right? So here we have a hole. A hole is being created. Let us say there is an electric field which is applied in the upward direction. Now due to this electric field, there will be a force experienced by the electron in the opposite direction. So that is the force experienced by the electron because of the external field. And let us say now this bond breaks. Now when this bond breaks, this electron, it will occupy this vacancy. So if it occupies this vacancy, then the hole will move in this direction. Now this becomes hole, right? Now, let us say this bond breaks. If this bond breaks, so this electron, it will occupy this hole and the hole will migrate in the opposite direction and the hole moves in this direction. Now let us say this hole breaks. So this bond breaks. So if this bond breaks, then this electron will occupy this hole and we can say the hole will move in this direction. So like this process keeps on happening. So can you see the motion of the hole? The holes are moving in the direction of the field and the electrons are moving opposite to the direction of field. So we can say inside the intrinsic semiconductor we have two types of currents. One because of the electrons which are in the conduction band and other due to the motion of holes which is in the valence band. So we can say there will be a current IE which is because of conduction electron and there will be a current IH which is due to the holes in the valence band. So that we have to remember. So the overall current, So the overall current in the metal or in the conductor, so not metal, so overall current will be IE plus IH. So that we have to remember in case of intrinsic semiconductor. I hope it is clear. So if I say Ne, that is the concentration of free electrons. So this is the concentration of free electrons, and NH is concentration of holes. Usually concentration is measured like this, say 10 raised per 19 per meter cube per unit volume, right? So and Ni is concentration of intrinsic charge carriers. Okay, concentration of intrinsic charge carriers. So in semiconductors, there is a relation of between these three physical quantities. So it will be Ni is nothing but the square root of Ne NH. So this relation we have to remember, and it is applicable whether we have a pure semiconductor or doped semiconductor. Now let us see the example of N-type semiconductor. So in N-type semiconductor, what we have done, we have replaced some silicon atoms with phosphorus, which is pentavalent. So we have pentavalent impurity. So we are using phosphorus. Now phosphorus has 5 electrons in its valence shell, and 4 of these electrons will be used to make bond with the neighboring 4 silicon atoms. So we have neighboring 4 silicon atoms. So it will form bonds with these silicon atoms, and the 5th electron, which is loosely bound to the phosphorus, can be released to the conduction band even at room temperature. So the 5th loosely bound electron can be released at room temperature to conduction band. Now the generation of electron is happening in 2 ways. So generation of electrons happening in 2 ways. So first, we can say some of the electrons will be donated by the phosphorus. So donated by phosphorus, which is our donor atom. And second, intrinsically, right? So when bond breaks, we'll be having some electrons, free electrons, which will move to the conduction band intrinsically. So due to these 2 ways, the concentration of electron will be very large in comparison to holes. So we can say Ne will be large in comparison to hole. And there is one more process happening, which is known as the recombination of electron with the hole. So if we consider recombination process, the concentration of hole will further go down. So we can say the concentration of electron will be very large in comparison to hole. So the majority of the electrons will come from where? It will come from the phosphorus. So we can say if we have Nd is the concentration of phosphorus atoms. So we can say this is the concentration of donor atoms. So we can say Ne will be nearly equals to Nd. So if Ne is nearly equals to Nd, then if we want to find the concentration of holes, we can use this formula. Ni is equals to root of Ne times NH. So NH will be Ni square divided by Nd, because N is nearly equals to Nd, right? So we should remember this. So usually what type of question can be asked? Will be given Ni, right? Will be given Nd, and we have to find the concentration of the hole. I think this concept is clear. Now let us see the band structure in N-type semiconductor. So here we have conduction band, this is valence band. Now we know that there are some loosely bound electrons with the phosphorus atom. So, and they will move to the conduction band with a small amount of energy. Now there will be a new energy level created between these 2 bands, and this energy level is known as donor energy level, right? So the electrons which are in this, so it contains the energy of the electrons which are bonded with the phosphorus. So they will gain energy and they can easily move to the conduction band, and they will take part in the conduction process. And there will be some electrons which will move from the valence band to the conduction band intrinsically, right? When the bond breaks, so the electron will be released to the conduction band, and when that happens, there will be a hole generated in the valence band. So this we have to remember. And there is one more way in which we can show an N-type semiconductor. Suppose this is our n-type semiconductor, and we can say when the phosphorus loses electron, it will become positively charged. So this is known as the donor core, and I can also show an electron, which is the donated electron. So like this we can show. Now let us see the another type of semiconductor, which is p-type. So here we are using trivalent impurities. Trivalent impurities. So let us take an example of aluminium. So what we have done, we have replaced some of the silicon atoms with aluminium. Now this aluminium has 3 valence electrons. Those 3 electrons will be bonded. It will make bonds with the neighboring 3 silicon atom. And the 4th bond will be having some vacancy. And this vacancy is nothing but the hole, right? So it is having a hole in the, you can see the 4th bond. Now can you see, if we have say 10 aluminium atoms, there will be 10 holes created by that. And there will be some holes which are being generated intrinsically. So we can say in p-type semiconductor, holes are generated first by, you can say, will be having aluminium, by aluminium. Second, intrinsically. So can you see the concentration of holes will be large in comparison to concentration of electrons? And again, the concentration of electron will further go down due to recombination process. So we can say in p-type semiconductor, the concentration of holes will be very large in comparison to concentration of electron. And we can say the majority of the holes are due to aluminium atoms. So and these aluminium atoms, basically they are accepting the electrons, and the aluminium will become negatively charged. So we'll call it a acceptor atom. So aluminium is a acceptor atom. So we can say Na is the concentration of acceptor atom. And we can say the concentration of hole will be nearly equals to the concentration of the acceptor atom. And if we want to find the concentration of electron, we can find this by using that intrinsic charge carrier formula. So Ni square divided by Na. So we can use this and we can find the concentration of electron. I hope the concept is clear. Now let us see what is the band diagram for p-type semiconductor. So in p-type semiconductor, we'll be having another energy level created, which is known as acceptor energy level. So what happens, suppose if we have some electrons in the valence band, these electrons can easily move to this energy level, and then we can say there will be a hole created. So there will be a hole created in the valence band because of this energy level, right? So there will be some holes created because of intrinsic property, right? So when some bonds break, the electron will move to the conduction band and there will be a hole created. And there will be some holes created when the electron moves from the valence band to this acceptor energy level. So you can see now again the holes are being created in the 2 ways, and right? So I think this concept is clear. So we should remember this. And there is one more way to show p-type semiconductor, where we show an acceptor core, right? So this will be acceptor core. And I can also show a hole, right? This is the hole. I hope the band structure is clear to you. Now let us move to the next session. Now let us see how the conduction is happening in metal. So in current electricity, we know that when the charge carrier moves, we'll define a velocity known as a drift velocity. And this drift velocity is nothing but J upon Ne, right? J upon Ne, where N is the number density of the charge carriers, J is the current density, E is the charge on one carrier, Vd is the drift velocity. And we also know that electric field inside the conductor will be equals to rho J, where rho is the resistivity. And we can also write this as J as sigma times A. Is it clear? So we already know these two formulas. Okay, so and drift velocity. So here I want to find the value of sigma, right? Now sigma is J upon E. And we know one more formula, which is the mobility of charge carrier, which will be drift velocity per unit electric field. So there are 3 formulas. I'm going to use these 3 formulas to see what is the conductivity of a metal. So J upon E is what? So J is NeVd and E is Vd by mu. So we can say it will be Ne mu. So we can say the conductivity of a metal will be given by this formula Ne mu. So you should remember this formula. Now let us see what is the conductivity in semiconductors. So in semiconductor, the conductivity is because of holes as well as electrons. So we can say the total conductivity will be conductivity due to electrons plus conductivity due to holes, and this can be written as concentration of electron times E times mobility of electron plus concentration of holes times E times mobility of holes. So you should remember this formula for semiconductors. Now let us see some illustrations, or let us say some PYQs based on the same formula. So mobility of the electron in semiconductor is defined as the ratio of the drift velocity to the applied electric field. If an n-type semiconductor, the density of the electron is 10 raised to 19 per meter cube, and their mobility is 1.6 meter square per volt second, then the resistivity of the semiconductor, since it's a n-type semiconductor, contribution of holes is ignored. Okay, so is close to. So we need to find the resistivity of the semiconductor, and resistivity is reciprocal of conductivity. So we should remember this. And we know that conductivity of a semiconductor is given by NEE mu E plus NHE mu H. And we know that in the question we have clearly mentioned that we should ignore holes. So we can take this second term to be 0. If the second term is 0, we'll be having sigma as NE E times mu E, and we can say resistivity will be 1 upon NE E times mu E. Now let us plug in the values. So NE is given as 10 raised to 19, E is 1.6 into 10 raised to minus 19, mu is given as 1.6 in SI units. So this comes out to be 1 upon 2.56, and this is close to 0.4 ohms meter. So C is the right answer. I hope the concept is clear. Now let us see one more example. So here, what is the conductivity of semiconductor conductor sample having electron concentration as this? So this is basically Ne, which is 5 into 10 raised to power 18 per meter cube, and hole concentration is 5 into 10 raised to power 19 per meter cube, and mobility of electron is given as 2 meter square volt inverse second inverse, and mobility of hole is given as 0.01 meter square volt inverse second inverse. Now we need to find the conductivity. So sigma is N E times mu E plus N H E times mu H. So let us put the values. 1.6 into 10 raised to power minus 19. E will be common. So N is given as 5 into 10 raised to power 18 times 2 plus 5 into 10 raised to power 19 times 0.01. So let us take 10 raised to power 19 common. So we'll write it as 1.6 times 1 plus 0.05. So that will be 1.05 times 1.6. So the answer has to be slightly greater than 1.6. So the option A is the right answer, right? 1.68 ohm meter inverse. So we are done with one part of the video where we have covered different types of semiconductors and what is p-type, what is n-type, and what is the band theory, right? So now let us see what is a p-n junction. Now, what is a p-n junction? If we have a p-type semiconductor on one side and n-type semiconductor on the other side, this arrangement is known as a p-n junction. Okay, and how we can form that? We will take a pure semiconductor, and on one side we'll dope this with a pentavalent, and on the other side we'll dope this with a trivalent. So we'll get a p-n junction. So what is happening here? Can you see there is a concentration difference on the left side at the p-type semiconductor? The holes are in majority carrier. So these circles are holes, and these red circles are electrons. So we can say due to this concentration difference, on both sides, on the left side we have large number of holes, on the right side we have large number of electrons. Holes, they move from P to N, and electrons move from N to P, right? So that thing will happen, and due to this there will be a current. So holes are moving from left to right, electrons are moving from right to left. So can you see there is a current which is from P to N side? So this current, let's say this is I1. Now this I1 is known as diffusion current. So I1 is diffusion current. So what happens as the migration starts? We can say there will be positively charged cores, or you can say the donor cores, will be left on the n side. So these are donor cores and these are acceptor cores. Can you see? Now due to this donor cores and acceptor core, there will be a field from the right to left. So there will be a field from the right to left, and due to this field, now it will be difficult for the majority carrier to move from one side to the another. So due to electric field at junction, it is difficult for majority carriers to move from one side to another. Okay. But what happens to the minority carrier? So if we consider a minority carrier, let us say this minority carrier, right? So on the n side we have hole as minority carrier, on the p side we have electron as minority carrier. So if I consider this electron, which is quite close to this region where we have electric field, now what happens? This electron will experience a force in the right direction and it will be swept away by the electric field and can move from the p to n side. Now due to this, there will be another current at the junction, which is known as I2, and this I2 is opposite to I1, right? Now this I2 current is known as drift current, right? So this is the drift current and it is because of minority carrier, due to minority carriers, right? And the region, this region where I have shown the acceptor cores and the donor cores, this region is known as depletion region. This is known as depletion region. Why it is called a depletion region? Because this region is being depleted of its free charge carriers because of diffusion process. So depletion region depleted of its free charge carriers due to diffusion process. So greater the width of this depletion region, it will be difficult for the majority carrier to move from one side to the another. So again, we should remember this. Greater the width, more the difficulty for majority charge carriers to move from one side to another. To move from one side to another. Right, so what happens? Can you see as the majority carriers move from left to right? Right, so the field at the junction will keeps on getting stronger. And then again, it will offer more resistance to the majority carrier. So what happens at equilibrium? So at equilibrium, I1 balances I2. So we can say there will be no net current. So there will be no net current at junction in equilibrium. When that thing happens, we can say the PN junction has been formed. Got it? So now let us see what is a PN junction diode. So if you provide some metallic contacts at the end, so these are metallic contacts. This is also a metallic contact, right? So why we provide metallic contacts? So that we can connect this PN junction with an external source or with a battery, and with that battery we can alter the electric field at the junction. So let us see a very basic case when there is no battery connected. So there will be some potential difference at the ends of the depletion region, right? So let us say this is delta V. Now, if I show this on a graph, so let us say at the P side the potential is 0 and then it increases and then it stabilizes, right? Let us say like this. Now this height is delta V and it is known as potential barrier. Now if a majority carrier has to move from one side to the another, it has to surpass this barrier. So we can say it should have some minimum energy, and that will be nothing but the charge times the barrier potential. So that is the minimum energy required to move from one side to another by majority carriers, right? Okay. So what would happen if we say connect the diode or connect the junction with a battery? So before that, let us understand like how to show PN junction diode in a circuit. So the symbol that we're going to use is a triangle with a vertical line. Now this triangle side is the P side and this vertical line side is the N side. So you should remember like this, PN. Now if we connect the P side with the high potential of the battery and N side to the low potential, then this type of a connection is known as a forward biasing. So let us consider let us study what is forward biasing. So forward biasing is when we connect P side to a high potential and N side to a low potential. This is N, this is P, right? This is positive and this is negative. So what would happen? So we know that at the barrier or at the junction, there is an electric field which is in the left direction. Let me call it E. Now because of this external source, now there will be an external field in the right direction. Now what happens due to this field? So this external field will reduce barrier potential. So we can say due to E external, field at junction decreases, right? So if that decreases, so let me redraw the diagram. So when the field at the junction decreases, so there is a, we can say a field E, and there will be an external field E external in the right direction. So what happens now, it will be easier for the holes to move towards the N side and it will be easier for the electron to move towards P side. So what happens, the width of depletion region decreases, right? Because now it is easier for majority carrier to again move from one side to the another. So that is the case when we have a battery connected like this. And this is P and this is N. So what we can say, if we show the same on the same graph, if I show the graph for forward biasing, so this, let us say this will be delta V1. So here, let us say this is delta V1, right? Now there is another type of biasing which is known as reverse biasing. So in reverse biasing, the diode, the P side is connected to the low potential and the N side is connected to the high potential. Now, can you see the direction of the external field? So external field is in the left direction, which is in the direction of the field at the barrier. So in this case, in reverse biasing, if I again show the diagram, the depletion region width increases. And it will be difficult for the majority carrier to move from one side to another side. So if I connect this with a P side to the low potential and N side to the high potential, now there is a external field which is in the left direction, and the field at the barriers again it is in the left direction. So if I show, if let us say the potential difference now is delta V2, so this can be shown on the same diagram. So I can show it like this. this will be delta V2. Now it will be even more difficult for majority carriers to move from P side to N side, right? But what happens in this case? But in this case, this field will assist the motion of minority carrier. Suppose if there is a hole in the N side, suppose if this hole is moving randomly in the N side, if we come close to this depletion region, now this hole will be swept by the field and it can move to the P side. So we can say in reverse biasing, there can be a current because of the minority carriers. But in the forward biasing, there will be a current because of the majority carriers. So that's why the current in forward biasing is the order of milliamperes. So in forward biasing, the current is of the order of milliampere, but in the reverse biasing, it is of the order of microampere, nearly 1,000 times lower current. Because in reverse biasing, we have minority carriers which constitute the current, but in the forward biasing, we have majority carriers. So we have to remember these points in mind. Now, if let us say see the case of an ideal diode. So in case of an ideal diode, we can say in forward biasing, the resistance is nearly zero. So we can say the diode is conducting in forward biasing, and in reverse biasing, the resistance will tends to infinity, or we can say it will be a perfect insulator. There will be no current. There will be no current through the diode. It will behave like an open switch, right? So I hope this concept is clear. Now let us see the VI characteristic of a diode. So what is the VI characteristic? Right. So we have seen the forward and the reverse biasing. So what we're going to do, we'll alter or we'll change the potential difference applied across the diode. So in the forward biased mode, as we increase the voltage, can you see initially there is no change in the current? There will be no current in the circuit, but suddenly at a particular value, the current increases drastically in the forward biasing. And this current and this voltage, this voltage is known as knee voltage. So we can say what is the knee voltage? Like beyond knee voltage, the current increases exponentially. And this knee voltage for silicon is around 0.7 volts. And for germanium, it is around 0.3 volts. So these values you should remember. And can you see now we have a non-linear graph. So it's a non-linear. So here we'll talk about a dynamic resistance. So dynamic resistance in forward biasing will be given by delta V upon delta I. Let us say there are 2 points on the graph, and usually we measure dynamic resistance beyond knee voltage. So let us say this is point number 1, this is point number 2. So if I measure this value, so this will be delta I and this will be delta V. If we take the ratio of delta V to delta I, we'll get the dynamic resistance in the forward biased mode. And now let us see what happens in the reverse biasing, right? In reverse biasing, can you see there is some constant current, and suddenly the current increases at a particular voltage. Now this voltage is known as the breakdown voltage. So at the breakdown voltage, the field at the junction will be so large that the field emission starts to act. What is the field emission? The bonds will break in a large number and there will be huge amount of current at the junction. Right. So we can clearly see that at the breakdown region, we have a different values of the current for nearly the same voltage. And this constant current in the reverse biased mode, this constant current, let us say this current is I naught, or we can, let us say this I naught. This I naught is known as reverse saturation current, and it is of the order of microampere. That we have to remember. And breakdown voltage, so at breakdown voltage, we have a range of values of the current, and usually it is recommended by the manufacturer of the diode that we should operate diode not beyond breakdown region, say so up to this particular volt, right, which is less than breakdown voltage. So this nature we have to remember. And suppose if I want to find, let us say in the reverse biased mode, the reverse saturation current is attained, say when the voltage is V0. So what we can say, the resistance in reverse biasing will be V0 divided by I0. Got it? So these points we have to remember. Now let us see the types of questions which are being asked from the diodes. And just remember one more thing, in case of ideal diode, in the forward biasing, it is conducting, in the reverse biasing, it will be non-conducting. So let us see a typical question. So when a diode is forward biased, it has a voltage drop of 0.5 volts. The safe limit of the current through the diode is 10 milliampere. If the battery of EMF 1.5 volt is used in the circuit, the value of the minimum resistance to be connected in series with the diode so that the current does not exceed the safe limit. Okay, let me draw the circuit here. So we have given a diode in forward biased mode. So it means the P side is connected to the high potential and N side to the low potential. And we have connected this diode in series with a resistor, and there is a battery and of voltage 1.5, and we need to find the value of the resistance to so that the current in the circuit does not exceed 10 milliampere. And we have also given one more thing. When this diode is conducting, there is a potential drop of 0.5 volt across it. And let us say this is R, right? So to find the minimum value of the resistance, we'll assume the maximum current in the circuit. So let us say the current in the circuit is 10 milliampere. Now for this current, the potential drop across the resistor will be nothing but 1.5 minus 0.5, so that will be 1 volt. Now through this resistor there is a current of 10 milliampere. So by Ohm's law we can say the resistance will be 1 divided by 10 milli, right? 10 raised to minus 3, so it comes out to be 100 ohms. So the resistance, minimum resistance required to operate this diode will be 100 volts, 100 ohms. Now let us see another question. So the current I in the network. So we have given 2 diodes and 6 resistors and a battery like this. So can you see the N side of the diode is connected to the high terminal, right? And the P side is connected to the low potential. So we can say both these diodes are reverse biased. So they are in reversed biased mode. So when that is the case, and if nothing is given in the question about the type of diode or like whether it is an ideal or real diode, you should always treat it as a ideal diode. So in ideal diode, in reverse biasing, it behaves as open switch. Okay, right. So if I redraw the diagram, so I can show diode as an open switch, and the resistor will be as it is. So we have a diode as an open switch, and then we have a 5 ohms resistor and a battery. So we have this circuit diagram. So this is a 9 volt battery, 5 ohms resistor. This is 10 ohms resistor, 5 ohms, 5, 10, 10, 20. So if I show the direction of the flow of current, so current will flow like this. It will not pass through the open circuits. So can you see now this 5 ohms and this 20 ohms are not contributing anything, so we can remove them. So the current is flowing in a path which is having a resistance of, let me add up all these resistances, 10, 5, 5, 10, so around 30. So we can say the current, let us say the current is I. So I will be 9 divided by 30. So that comes out to be 0.3 ampere. So option C is the right answer. Now let us see one more question. So in this question, we have given 2 identical capacitors A and B charged with the same potential of 5 volt are connected in 2 different circuits as shown in below at time t equals to 0. If the charge on capacitor A and B at time t equals to CR is Q and QB respectively, then, okay, right. So we need to find the value of Q and QB at t equals to CR. Now let us see the first case. So in the first case, we have a charged capacitor and the positive plate is connected with the N side and the negative plate is connected to the P side. So we can say this diode is reverse biased. If it is a reverse biased and nothing is given about the diode, so we'll treat this diode as an ideal. So if it is an ideal diode, then it is acting like an open switch. So in the first case, there will be no discharging, right? So if there is no discharging, we can say the charge in the capacitors will remain as it is. So it will be CV. So in the first case, QA is CV, where C is the capacitance, V is the potential difference across the capacitor. Now in the second case, so in the second case, the positive plate is connected with the P side and the negative plate is connected to the N side. So we can say this diode is forward biased. If it is forward biased, there will be a current. And now we have a RC discharging circuit. Now there will be a current in this circuit. So in the second case, it acts like a RC discharging. And in RC discharging, the charge on the capacitor will be the initial charge times e raised power minus t by RC, right? So that is the formula that we use for discharging. So at t equals to CR, we can clearly see that the Q value will be CV e raised to power minus 1, which will be CV by E. So can you see which option is correct? So option C is the right answer. Okay, so this type of questions are being asked. And there is one more type of question which is based on the VI characteristic. So about the resistances, dynamic resistances. So let us see. The VI characteristic of a diode is shown in the figure. The ratio of the forward and the reverse biased resistance is. Okay, right. So in the forward biased mode, how to find the resistance? I told you like we have to take 2 points on the graph or any 2 points, right? So let us take this point is A and this point is B. So now find the current, right? Change in the current from A to B. So it will be 20 minus 10. So it will be 10 milliampere. Now let us see what is the change in the voltage from A to B. And this will be 0.1 volts. So the resistance, let us say R1 is the resistance in forward biased mode. So that will be delta V upon delta I, and delta V is 0.1 and delta I is 10 milliampere. So this comes out to be how much? So we have 0.1 divided by 0.01. So it will be 10 ohms, right? So in the forward biased mode, we have 10 ohms resistance. So in the reverse biased, we have given minus 10 volt for the reverse saturation current to be achieved. And the reverse saturation current is given as 1 microampere. So we can say the resistance in the reverse biased mode will be 10 divided by 1 microampere. So 10 raised to power minus 6. So it will be 10 raised to power 7 ohms. And we have to find the ratios. So R1 by R2 will be 10 by 10 raised to power 7, which comes out to be 10 raised to power minus 6. So option B is the right answer. So I hope you know how to tackle such questions in exam. So now let us see a special purpose diode, that is a Zener diode. Now what is a Zener diode? It is a special purpose diode which is being used as a voltage stabilizer. So we can use this for voltage stabilizer. And let us see the properties of Zener diode. So it is highly doped. So it's a highly doped semiconductor. And in this, we'll do the doping such that the depletion region is very thin. So depletion region is very thin. And there is one more thing, that it is always operated in reverse biased mode. So always operated in reverse biased mode at breakdown voltage. Okay, so we use this Zener diode at breakdown voltage. And why we use breakdown voltage? Because at the breakdown voltage, we have a range of currents for the same voltage. So let us see a basic structure or basic diagram that we see for Zener diode. So can you see there is a diode which does not look like a standard diode, right? So can you see the symbol? So there are two additional lines. So basically this is the symbol for Zener diode. So what we do? So we'll operate Zener diode at the breakdown voltage, and we will connect a load resistor in parallel to the Zener diode, and we will feed an unregulated DC supply, so which is varying. Suppose we have an input unregulated voltage which varies from say 10 to 16 volts, and but we want that the device that we are using, we want a constant potential difference across that device to make it work, right? To make that device work. So what we want to do, we'll have a Zener diode, and it will maintain that potential difference which is same as the, you can say, the breakdown voltage, and in this case we'll call that voltage as Zener voltage, right? So Vz is Zener voltage. So can you see some important currents in this circuit? So let us say this is the input current I, and the current which is going through the load is the load current IL. So if I apply junction law at this junction, we can say there will be a current through the Zener. I'll call it a Zener current. So by junction law, we can say I is nothing but the sum of Zener current and the load current. So what is, so how to find IL? So I can say IL is nothing but the Zener voltage divided by the resistance of the load. So this will be the load current and the input current. So what is the input current? Let us say at a particular instant, the voltage, the unregulated voltage is VL, let us say, right? So the input current will be what? So can you tell me what is the potential difference across the resistance RS, which is the input resistance? it will be nothing but VL minus VZ, right? VZ is the potential drop across the zener. So we can say the input current will be VL minus VZ divided by the input resistance. So now we know how to find the input current, how to find the load current, and by junction law we can find the zener current, which is nothing but the difference of these two. So I minus IL. So usually we like in JEE or NEET, you'll have a question based on the similar structure. So let us see. So basically this is the basic characteristic, right, that we have already studied, and we are using and we are working in the breakdown region. Now let us see some of the illustrations. So let us see this question. So figure shows there is a DC voltage regulator circuit with a Zener diode of breakdown voltage of 6 volts. So across this, the breakdown voltage is 6 volts, and if the unregulated input voltage is varying from 10 to 16 volts, then what is the maximum Zener current? Okay, now one thing you have to remember, if the voltage drop across the Zener is 6 volt, the remaining voltage drop will appear across the input resistance. Now if it is 6, suppose if the input resistance is 10 volts, then the potential drop across the input resistance will be 10 minus 6, 4 volt. If the input voltage is 16, then the voltage drop across the input resistance will be 16 minus 6, that will be 10. So greater the potential drop across the input resistance, greater is the input current, right? Greater is the input current, because so greater will be the Zener current, because the IL load current is already fixed, because we have a fixed load resistance and we have a fixed potential drop across the Zener. So we can say the load current is fixed, which will be Vz upon RL, that will be 6 divided by 4 kilo, and it will be 1.5 milliamperes. Now we know load current. So to have the maximum Zener current, the input current has to be maximum. So what we can do, we can assume that the input voltage is 16. So if it is 16, then the input current will be 16 minus 6 divided by 2 kilo. So that will be 12 by 2. Sorry, not 12, 10 by 2. So it will be 5 milliampere. Now we know the input current and we know the load current. So the Zener current will be the difference of these two currents of 5 minus 1.5. So that comes out to be 3.5 milliampere. So option D is the right answer. Now let us see one more illustration. Now in this question, we have to find the input current, we have to find load current and the Zener current. Again, it is quite similar to the last question. So can you see in this question, the Zener voltage is 10 volts. So what is the load current? It is very easy, right? So load current will be the Zener voltage divided by the load resistance, that will be 2 kilo. So it comes out to be 5 milliampere. Now, if the potential drop across the Zener is 10, then what is the potential drop across a 4 kilo ohms resistance? Can you see the input voltage is 60? So across 4 kilo ohm, it will be 60 minus 10. So this will be 50 volts. So the input current will be 50 divided by 4 kilo. So that comes out to be 12.5 milliampere. Now we know input current, we know load current. Now what is the Zener current? So that will be I minus IZ. Sorry, I minus IL. That will be 12.5 minus 5. So it comes out to be 7.5 milliampere, right? So these are the values for all the currents. Now let us see one more case. The circuit shown below is working as a 8 volt DC regulated voltage source. Can you see we have a voltage drop of 8 volt across the Zener diodes. When 12 volt is used as input, the power dissipated in each resistor, or sorry, in the each diode. So we have to find the power dissipation in each diode, and we have given input voltage as 12 volts. If the voltage drop across these two Zeners combined is 8 volt, then the potential drop across these input resistances, so it will be 200 plus 200, which are in series, so it will be 400 ohms. It will be 12 minus 8, which will be 4 volts. So we can say the input current will be 4 divided by 400. So that will be 10 milliampere. And this 10 milliampere, since there is no load connected, so this entire current will pass through the Zener, and we can say the power dissipated in one of the diode will be the voltage across that diode times the current. So voltage, can you see if they are in series, so and they are identical diodes, so we can say the potential drop across each diode will be 4 volts. So 4 times the current, that will be 10 milliampere. So it comes out to be 40 milliwatt. So we can say the answer will be 40. Got it? Now this is about Zener diode. Now let us see another application of diodes, and that is the rectification of AC signal. So if we have a AC signal and I want to convert that into DC, so the same thing we are doing with our charger, right? So we feed in the AC supply coming to our household and convert that supply into a DC supply that charges our mobile phone or our laptops. So rectifier is a device which converts AC to DC, right? So here we're going to study three types of rectifier. One will be half wave, then second will be full wave rectifier, and third will be full wave with capacitor filter. Now let us see one by one. So first we'll see what is this the circuit for this, and then we'll see how that circuit works. So in half wave rectifier we'll be having a alternating source, and this source is being connected with a transformer. So this is the primary winding of the transformer, and this is the secondary winding of the transformer, and there is a diode, a single diode, right? A single diode connected like this, and there is a resistor. That is, this is our load resistor, and this is the primary winding, this is the secondary winding. Okay, so now if the top side of the primary winding is at high potential and bottom is at low potential, then we can say that the top will be in the secondary, it will be at high and it will be low. So when this thing happens, so when we can say in the positive half cycle, so in the positive half cycle, this is our input voltage. The P side will be at high potential, the top side will be at high potential, bottom will be at low potential. Similarly, by mutual induction, the S will be at high potential, the top side of the secondary will be at high potential and bottom will be at low potential. Then we can say the P side of the diode is connected with the high potential. So this diode is forward biased, right? So it will be forward biased. So if the diode is forward biased, then it will be conducting. So there will be some current through this load, and we will measure this potential difference. Now this is the output voltage. So can you see we'll have a reading, right, when the diode is forward biased. Now if you talk about the second half cycle, which is the negative voltage, then we can say the top side of the primary will be at low potential, bottom will be at high potential. Similarly, by mutual induction, the secondary coil, the top side will be at low potential, bottom will be at high potential. In that case, the diode will become reverse biased. Now the diode is reverse biased, so it is non-conducting. So we are considering a case of an ideal diode. So it is non-conducting. So if it is non-conducting, there will be no current through the load resistor, so there will be no reading. So we can say if I plot the graph for output, it will be like this. So for first half cycle, we'll have a reading, or we have some output voltage, and then it will be 0. And then again for the third half cycle, it will be positive again, and then will be 0. So can you see what is happening here? We are able to rectify half of the wave, right? But not the full wave, because we are not able to rectify the second half. That much portion is not, we are not able to rectify. So that's why it is known as a half wave rectifier. And you should also remember one important point about the half wave rectifier, and the derivation of that is not that important. You should remember that the efficiency of half wave rectifier is close to 40%, right? Considering the losses and all those things. So it is close to 40%, that you have to remember. Now, let us see a full wave rectifier. So again, we'll feed us AC supply to this rectifier, and again we have a transformer, but now we are having a special transformer. It is known as a center tap transformer. In center tap transformer, the secondary winding is made up of two parts. So we have two coils in series, and there are two diodes. Let us say this is diode D1 and there is a diode D2, and they are joined together. Their P sides are joined together, and from the center of the secondary winding, there is a load resistance. So this is RL, and we are measuring the voltage across these 2 points. So this is our output voltage and this is our input voltage. Again, here what is happening? So we have a sinusoidally varying input voltage. This is input voltage, and in the positive half cycle, the top side of the primary will be at high potential and the bottom will be at low potential. Similarly, we can say the top side of the secondary will be high potential. So if now it is made up of two parts. So for the first part, the bottom side will be at low, and again for the bottom half, the top will be at high and the bottom will be at low. So can you see what is happening here? So the D1, it is connected with a high potential, so we can say D1 is forward biased, and D2 is connected with the low potential, so D2 is reverse biased. So what is happening here? So there will be a current through the resistor like this. So there is a current and we'll have some reading. So we will be able to rectify first half wave. So if I show it on the graph, so we are able to rectify half wave, and this is because of the diode D1. This is the output voltage. Now, if we talk about the second half cycle, the top end of the primary will be at low potential, bottom will be at high potential. Similarly, the polarity will also reverse on the secondary side. So the top will be at low potential, then plus, and then minus, and then plus. Can you say now the diode D1 is reverse biased and the diode D2 is forward biased? Now when diode D2 is forward biased, it becomes conducting and D1 will become non-conducting. So now the current will flow like this. Can you see even in the second half cycle, the direction of the current is same through the resistor. So we'll get this output. Can you see? And this output is because of D2. Similarly, for the next half cycle, we'll again able to rectify. So this is D3, sorry, again by D1. And then for the fourth half cycle, again we'll get rectification. So this will by D2. And again, remember one more thing. So the efficiency in case of a full wave rectifier is close to 80%. So do remember this, because there was a question in JEE where they have asked this, what is the efficiency of a full wave rectifier? So you should remember this, right? So now what is a rectifier with a capacitor filter? So can you see in both the rectifier, whether it is a full wave rectifier or a half wave rectifier, we are getting a rectification, but the voltage is not regulated. It is unregulated DC voltage. It just keeps on changing, right? But its direction is not changing. So to overcome that problem, we will use a capacitor filter. So let me draw the circuit first. So there is a AC source, and this is the primary winding, and again we have a center tap transformer, right? So the secondary is split up into two parts, and there are diode D1, and here we have diode D2, D1, D2, and the load is connected like this, and we have connected a capacitor in parallel to the load, and we are measuring the output voltage across the capacitor. Now what would happen in this case? In this case, as the current flows through the resistor, the capacitor will also get charged. So if the input voltage is sinusoidal like this, in this case the output voltage, it will increase, right? Let us say it increases, and then after that it will be nearly, we can say, remains constant. The reason for that is when there is no current, or when the current decreases, let us say, in that case there will be a discharging of the capacitor, and when the capacitor is getting discharged, what would happen? It will not get discharged instantly. It will take some time. So when it takes some time, suppose if we decide, if we set, suppose if we choose the value of C and RL such that the time constant is really high. If the time constant is really high, so the capacitor will take a large amount of time to get fully discharged. So if you consider if you take time constant to be large, in that case, it will discharge by a small amount, and again we can say the current will increase, and again it will get charged. So the cycle, so we can have nearly a constant output. So here we have nearly the constant output. So can you see? So with the help of the capacitor filter, we can regulate the DC output supply. I hope it is clear. So now let us see another special purpose diode, and that is a photodiode. And we use photodiode to detect photons. So to detect photons, right? And if I show you how it looks like, so there is a glass window, and this glass window is provided so that the photons can pass this glass window and they get absorbed at the depletion region. So what is happening in photodiode? So we have a diode, and which is connected in a reversed biased mode, right? So it is operated in reverse biased mode, right? So we are using it in reverse biased mode. So when the photons is being incident on at the depletion region, what happens? If the electron gains, when electron gains energy, or when you can say with the help of these photons, will be able to break the bonds. So when the bond breaks in the depletion region, what happens? So there will be an electron hole pair. So let's say this is the p side, this is n side. So here we have positive. Yeah, these are your donor cores, and here we have acceptor cores. And the field is in the left direction. So this is the direction of the field. So if a electron hole pair is generated, so there is a hole and there is an electron, what would happen? The hole will experience a force in the left direction, and the electron will experience force in the right direction. Got it? Can you see? And so what type so like you can say it is the current due to this will be in the left direction. Can we say that? So there will be a current in the left direction, and this current is just like a reverse biasing current. So it will increase the reverse biasing current if more photons are being incident. So we can say reverse biasing current is increased. So if we plot the graph, let us say we have four intensities of light where I4 is the greatest and I1 is the least. So can you see in case of I1, the reverse saturation current is small, but as the intensity is increased, it will increases, right? So it will keeps on increasing like this. So this is the basic VI characteristic for a photodiode, and it is always operated in reverse biased mode. That thing you have to remember, and you should remember this diagram, this graph, right? So I have the concept about photodiode is clear. Now what is happening here? If let us say this is the conduction band, and here we have a valence band. So if the electron in the valence band, if it gains energy and it goes to the conduction band, then we can say if we have a photons whose energy is equals to the forbidden energy gap. So this is the energy of photon. Then we'll be able to generate electron hole pair in photodiodes, right? So in this case, we can increase the current if the energy is greater or equals to this. So that is the only possibility in which we can use it. So I hope the concept about photodiode is clear. Now let us see the typical question that are being asked from photodiode. So if a semiconductor photodiode can detect a photon with a maximum wavelength of 400 nanometer, then its band energy gap is so Planck constant is given, speed of light is given. So let us see. So this is the band diagram. So electron is gaining energy and it goes to the conduction band, and we have incident of photon. So energy of the photon should be like the minimum energy required for this transition to happen should be equals to delta Eg, right? So the energy of the photon will be equals to delta Eg, and this can be written as, and we have given wavelength. So do you remember this formula? The energy in electron volt is 12400 divided by wavelength in angstrom. So if we use this formula, we can find the energy of the photon in electron volt, and that will be 12400 divided by the wavelength in angstrom. So 400 nanometer is nothing but 4000 angstrom. So we are getting 3.1 electron volt. So that is the answer of this question. Okay, now let us see another type of diode that we use, and it is LED. Now, what are LEDs? So you must have used LED to decorate your house during Diwali, right? So we use LED lamps, we use LED TVs. So it has a wide variety of applications. So it comes in different colors, right? And we can get different colors from the LED by altering the doping. So let us see. So these are the LEDs. So various commercially available LEDs are there. We have amber light, red light, blue light, green light, right? White light. All these LEDs are available in the market. Now let us see what happens in the case of LED. So we have a diode and we operate this diode in the forward biased mode. So remember this, it is operated in forward biased mode. And what is happening in this case? Let us see. So in the forward biased mode, again in LED we have a glass, right? Can you see the photons? If suppose if there is some photon generated by the LED, those photons can come out. So at the depletion region, what is happening? So at the depletion region, in forward biasing, there is a large amount of current flowing through the depletion region. So there is a combination happening. So recombination of electron hole pair happens at the close to the depletion region. So can you see? So there is a recombination of free electrons and the holes. And due to this recombination process, what would happen? So if I show the band diagram, so this is the conduction band, this is the valence band, the electron from the conduction band, they will jump and they occupy the holes. So if that happens, the electron, they are losing energy, and that energy is being released in the form of photons. Now this energy will be nearly equals to the forbidden energy gap. So if we alter the doping, what would happen? So if we alter the doping, we can alter delta Eg. If we can alter delta Eg, we can alter the wavelength of the emitted photons. So we'll be having different colors of light depending upon the dopings, right? Depending upon the doping. So can you see if we have different doping agents, in that case we'll have different colors, right? So we can have infrared, we have red, amber, yellow, green, blue, white. So all these types of colors can be produced with the help of LEDs, and these are the VI characteristic that we have to remember. You should remember the order. So first we have infrared, then red, with amber, green, yellow, green, blue, and white. So again, this graph is very important. So we have different knee voltages for different colors. Obviously, that is because of the doping. So we have different semiconductors together. So that's why we have different knee voltages. So that's why there is a variation. Now let us see the last special purpose diode that we have to study is solar cells. So we all know what are solar cells. Yes. So solar cell, they harness sun's energy and convert that energy into electrical energy. Now let us see how the solar cell works. So first of all, in solar cell, what do we have? So we will incident photons. So the light is being incident on the diode, and due to that, the electron hole pair. So it will break the bonds at near the depletion region, and there will be electron hole pair generation. So we have a PN junction device which generate EMF when the solar radiation falls on the junction that I have already mentioned, and it is just like a photodiode without any biasing. So no biasing is required. It is just like that, practically, right? So it is just like that. And what are the construction? Let us see the basic construction. So this is the diagram which I got it from the NCERT book. So can you see we have a PN junction? We have a PN junction here, and if you look at the P side is thick, and the N side is thin. The purpose for that would be we want to absorb photons near the depletion region, and on the N side, we have a metallized finger electrodes. Why we use finger electrodes? So that we can expose as much area as possible so that the photon can be absorbed near the depletion region. And the back side, so there is a back contact on the P side, which is again a metallic contact. Now let's see how it works. So first of all, when we incident photon, there will be an electron hole pair generation, right? So there is an electron hole pair generation. So let me show this with a diagram. So let us say this is the P side, this is the N side, and here we have donor cores, here we have acceptor cores, there is electric field in the left direction, and we are generating electron hole pair here, right? So there is a hole, there is an electron, and it is not there is no biasing, right? There is no biasing. So let us, there are multiple of electron hole pair generated. Now what would happen due to this electric field? So these electron or these holes, they will accumulate on this side, right? And these electron, they will accumulate on this side. Now due to this, there will be a potential difference. So there will be some potential difference at the ends. Okay, so first there is an electron hole pair generation, and then there will be a separation of electron hole pair by the electric field at the depletion region, and then these are being collected, and then the collection of the newly generated charge carriers. So now we have a charge carriers which are at the ends. Can you see? There is a collection of the charge carrier at the ends. Okay, now let us see what is the VI characteristic of a solar cell. So let me explain you. So let me show this with a blue color. right? So can you see we have written here VOC. VOC is the open circuit voltage. What is open circuit voltage? So if we have a solar cell, this is the depletion region. Here we have holes. Here we have electrons. So this is relatively positive. This is negative. Now the voltage across these two ends is VOC, right? Open circuit, because it is not connected with any external circuit. So that's why it is known as open circuit voltage. VOC is open circuit voltage. Okay. Next, this JSC is the short circuit current, or you can say current density, right? JSC is short circuit current density, and the corresponding current will be short circuit current. So why it is called a short circuit current? Because if I connect the ends with a connecting wire which is having zero resistance, then what would happen? So there will be a current like this, right? In the clockwise direction. So there will be a current. And since this current is in the direction, it is just like the direction of the reverse biasing current, right? So that's why this current is, you can say, is on the negative x-axis, negative y-axis. So that's why it is on the negative y-axis, because it is in the direction of the reverse biased current. Now, obviously, if I add some resistance externally, if there is some resistance, what would happen? Obviously, the current will reduce. So that's why we'll get a graph like this. So basically, that much portion is more important, right, as far as solar cell is concerned. But suppose if I add some biasing, right? So if I apply some forward biased voltage, in that case, what would happen? The current will increase, right? It is just like it will increase because there will be a forward biasing current. And if I reverse the biasing, can you see? Then we have a reverse biasing current. So you should remember this blue graph is when there is a illumination. What is illumination? When we are incident photons, and this black one is nothing but a regular behavior of a diode in a forward biasing and the reverse biasing. So here they are showing nearly a zero current, because the current in the reverse biasing is of the order of microampere. So that's why. So we should remember this graph. So usually I have such kind of a question was asked in JEE Mains, where they have given this graph and they will ask you which diode this graph represents. So now you know it is solar cell, right? I hope the concept of solar cell is clear. Now we have come to the last part of our video, and that is the logic gates, right? So before understanding logic gates, we'll see what are analogous and the digital signals. So what is an analogous signal? Let me show you with the graph. If there is a signal, say voltage signal, which is varying with time, it can have any value, right? Something like this. So it can have a continuous values, different values, right? On at different times. And there is another signal which can take certain discrete values. For example, it takes 5 volts or 0 volts, 5 volts or 0 volts, right? So there are only two possible values. So such signal is known as a digital signal. If we have a continuous values, the such signal is known as an analogous signal. So when we are dealing with logic gates, what are logic gates? They work on digital signals, and whatever devices we have studied, with the help of those devices, we can form some gates, and we can alter the so for a particular set of inputs, we'll get some particular set of outputs. We'll study that. So before that, we should understand the Boolean algebra that is being used to understand the working of a gate. So there are three major operations that we have to study. First is the conjunction, which is known as an AND operation. In AND operation, it is represented with a multiplication, right? So for example, if we have two inputs, we'll say A and B, and there is a second operation which is disjunction, which is known as OR operation, which is represented with the addition, which is A plus B, A or B, right? We read it as A or B. And there is a negation, third operation, which is it will invert the signal. Suppose if we have a high signal, it will make it low. If we have a low signal, it will make it high. So it is known as bar, right? A bar or not A. Sometimes we can also represent this with prime, A prime. Okay, so let us see what are the rules for Boolean algebra. So basically here we are talking about only discrete signals. So we are going to understand that what is a low signal? Low signal is represented with 1, and high signal is represented with 0. right? So 1 0. Suppose if we have 5 volts and say 2 volts, only these two voltages are available, then we can say this one is low, this one is high. It doesn't mean that 0 is always 0, right? 0 volts. It can be like there has to be some difference between the high voltage and the low voltage. Low voltage can be non-zero. So if we have 2 volts, I'll call it a low. If we have 5 volts, I'll call it a high. Now let us see what happens. What are the different rules? So can you see if we have a signal A, it can be high or low. If we add this to 0, we'll get A only, right? So just remember, if you add 0 to any signal, you will get that signal only, right? A plus 0, A. Now if we add 1 to any signal, we'll get a high signal. So that is the output. Anything which is added with 1, you get a high signal, 1. If you multiply any signal with 0, you will get 0. If you multiply any signal with 1, now it will depends upon the value of the signal A, right? A multiplied with 1 is A. A and A. So if we add the same singular to itself, you will get the same signal only. A plus A is A. If you add A to its complement, now if A is 1, its complement will be 0. So 1 plus 0, you will get 1 only, right? Now, A times A, if it is A is 1, then 1 times 1, you'll get a high signal. But if 0 times 0, you will get a low signal. So it depends upon the value of A. So we can say A dot A can be written as A only. Now, if I multiply A to its complement, 1, suppose if A is 1, its complement will be 0. So 1 times 0 will be 0. And if 0 times 1 will be 0. So you will get always 0. The complement, or you can say the complement of A. So this is nothing but A, right? If you negate the signal 2 times, you will get the original signal. So these rules you have to remember, because with the help of Boolean algebra, we can solve logic gate problem in seconds, right? Now, apart from this, there are other rules. So let us see this one. A plus AB, A plus A dot B, or A multiplied B. This can be written as A. If I take A as common, so it will be 1 plus B and 1 plus B. So can you see this this rule? A plus 1 is 1. So this is 1. So A times 1 is A. So you will get A. Now, let us consider this particular case. So we have A plus B times A plus C. So if I apply, so let me first name these. So this one, you can say commutative property of, this is the commutative property. And this one is again commutative, right? In production, in you can say in multiplication, this is the commutative property in addition. And this is associativity, right? Associativity property in addition, and this is in multiplication. And this is the distributive property. Okay, so let's come back to this question. So if I apply distributive property, so it will be A dot A plus A dot C plus B multiplied with A plus B multiplied with C. B multiplied with C. So can you see from this first 3 terms, we can take A as common. So if we take A as a common, so we'll get A plus, and this will be, okay, right? So it will be A plus C plus B, or I can also write this as, so I can also write it as A plus AC plus AB plus BC, and A is can be written as A times 1. So if I for these first 3 terms, if I take A as common, so it will be 1 plus C plus B plus BC. So can you see 1, if we have 1 plus C plus B, so if one of the input is 1 in addition, then this entire value is 1. So it will be A times 1 plus BC, which comes out to be A plus BC. So can you see in this result? So that's why it is A times BC. And there is one more important theorem, which is known as De Morgan's theorem. Suppose you want to convert from multiplication to addition. So let us say I have A times B, A and B, its complement or bar. So this can be written as A bar plus B bar. Okay, so this multiplication is replaced with the addition, and A plus B bar, this can be written as A bar multiplied with B bar. So these results you have to remember in order to solve logic gates problem effectively. So do remember this. Now let us see some of the application. So let me give you a question. So if we have given A multiplied B, A bar multiplied with B bar plus AB whole bar, right? So just pause the video, try to solve this question on your own. Okay. So let us see what we can do. So if I consider these as two terms, so if I apply De Morgan's theorem, so this can be written as A bar dot B bar whole bar multiplied with AB whole bar. Now let us apply De Morgan's theorem for this multiplication. So this can be written as A double bar plus B double bar multiplied with AB whole bar, right? So A double bar is A, B double bar is B multiplied with A dot B bar. So this can be written as A bar plus B bar, De Morgan's theorem. Now let us apply distributivity. So it will be A bar plus AB bar plus B A bar plus B B bar. And what is A bar? That is 0. So this term is 0. This term is 0. So we are left with A B bar plus B A bar. So like this, we can simplify some complex looking results, right? So let us do one more example. So let us say we have A bar B plus A B bar, and we are taking the whole bar. So let us simplify this. Again, we can apply De Morgan's theorem. So it will be A bar B whole bar multiplied with A B bar whole bar. So let us apply De Morgan's for these two terms. So it will be A double bar plus B bar, and it will be A bar plus B double bar. So this can be written as A plus B bar times A bar plus B. So it will be A bar plus AB plus B bar A bar plus B bar B. Now this is 0. This term is again 0. So it will be AB plus A bar B bar. So like this we can simplify. Okay, so I hope now if the Boolean algebra is clear, now let us see the logic gates. So what are logic gates? So there is a certain logical relation between the input and the output of the voltages. So, and we are going to cover five gates. So one is AND, then OR, then NOT, NAND, NOR, and there is a special purpose gate, a special gate, that is exclusive gates. You can say XOR, or you can say XNOR, right? So these are special gates, exclusive gates basically. So but in the syllabus only these 5 gates are mentioned, so we should focus more of our energy on these gates, right? So let us see. So let us first start with the AND gate. To understand AND gate, let us study this with a circuit. So suppose we have two switches which are connected in parallel, sorry, which are connected in series. And there is a battery and there is a bulb. Okay, and let us call this switch as A, this switch as B, and if the bulb glows or does not glow, so the output of the bulb is C. So let me write down A, B, and C in a tabular form. So when the switch is open, we'll call it that we have a low input. When the switch is closed, we'll call it a high input. So if A is open, we can say the value of A will be 0. And if B is open, then we can say the value of B is 0. If the bulb does not glow, then we have a low output. If the bulb glows, then we have a high output. So when both the switches are open, then the circuit is open. So there will be no current through the bulb and it will not glow. So we have a low output. Now, if I increase, say if I close the switch A, still the circuit will remain open. So if this is 1 and B is 0, again we'll get a 0 output, so the bulb will not glow. Suppose if we close B, right? If we close B and keep the A open, in that case, again the circuit is open, the bulb will not glow, we'll get a low output. Suppose if both the switches are closed, so we'll have high input, let us say. In that case, there will be a current through the bulb and it will glow. So we'll have a high output. Now this table is known as a truth table, and it gives you all possible inputs and all possible outputs. Truth table. And in Boolean algebra, I can show it as A and B gives C, right? A and B gives C. So that we have to remember. And what is the symbol used for AND gate in a circuit? It will be a D, right? Something like this. So this is the symbol that is being used. So we have two inputs A and B, and the output is C. And we can form gate with the help of this, the diodes and the transistors, which has been deleted, right? Transistor has been deleted, but we require a transistor to make some of the gates. So now let us see the OR gate. So let me first draw the circuit diagram. So we have, say, two switches which are connected in parallel, and there is a battery and a bulb like this. So this switch is A, this is B, and the output of the bulb is C. If bulb glows, we have a high output. If bulb does not glow, we have a low output. So first let us draw the truth table. Right, so if the switch 1 is closed, right? If I close this switch, what would happen? So there will be a current through the bulb, so it will glow. So 1, 0, we'll have a high output. If both the switches if both these switches are open, in that case we have a low output. Now if we close the switch B, keep the switch A open, so it will be 1, this will be 0, we'll get a high output. And if we keep both the switches closed, in that case again we'll get a high output. So in OR gate, you can say if any of the input is high, we'll get a high output. And in AND gate, if all the inputs are high, only in that case we'll get a high output. So in Boolean algebra, we can show it as A or B gives C, right? A or B gives C, and we can write this as A plus B is equals to C. And the symbol that we use is like this. So that is the symbol which is being used for OR gate. So we have A, B, and C. And do remember one more thing. It is not necessary to have only two inputs. There can be more than two inputs in AND and OR gates. Now the third gate is NOT gate. So what is a NOT gate? It is also known as an inverter. So it is also known as inverter because it will invert the signal. Okay, so we can form a NOT gate by using a transistor. So this is the symbol for transistor. Right, transistor is being deleted, but suppose if in the exam they will give you such kind of a diagram, such kind of a symbol. So just remember this is nothing but a NOT gate, right? So this is basically transistor, and this circuit working as a NOT gate. This is a transistor, right? Since we haven't done the working of transistor, so you won't be able to understand this at this point of time, and obviously the working is also not required. But just remember, if we have this kind of a circuit, it is a NOT gate. So in NOT gate, if I draw the truth table, say the input is A and the output is, say, X. So if A is low, the output will be high. If A is high, the output will be low, right? And so the symbol that is being used for NOT gate is a triangle with a dot. So there will be single input and single output in an NOT gate. Okay, so I think NOT gate is also clear to you, and it is also why it is called inverter, because it will invert the signal. If you have a low signal, it will invert that to high. If we have high, it will invert that to low. And in Boolean algebra, it can be written as not A bar is equals to X, or we can say not A gives X. Okay, now let us see what is a NAND gate. So NAND gate is a AND gate followed by a NOT gate. So there is a AND gate followed by a NOT gate, and we can also show it like this, D with a circle. So usually in exams, usually in paper, they will give you this this diagram. So again, what can you see? It will invert the outputs of the AND gates. So we can say the truth table. If we have A, B, and let's say this is X, A, B, and X. So if it is 0, 0, we'll get 1. If it is 1, 0, we'll get 1. If it is 0, 1, we'll get 1. If it is 1 and 1, we'll get 0. Can you see the outputs have been inverted by the NOT gate? So just remember this truth table. And in Boolean algebra, this can be written as A multiplied B bar. This is, it gives you X, and A dot A and B bar, this can also be written as A bar plus B bar. That is De Morgan's theorem, by De Morgan's theorem. Do remember this, right? So NAND gate is also known as a universal gate. Universal gate. Why we call it a universal gate? Because we can form AND, OR, and NOT gate by using combination of NAND gates. So let us see. So if we connect it like this, so if we join the inputs, so A, here we have A, now here we have a NAND gate, so it will be A multiplied A with bar. So this is what it is, A bar plus A bar, which is nothing but A bar. So can you see we are getting a NOT gate. Similarly, if we use two NAND gates like this, we can form a AND gate. So let us see. So A and B. So the output here will be A multiplied B bar. So here we have A multiplied B bar. Here also the input is A multiplied B bar. And here we'll get A multiplied B bar multiplied with A multiplied with B bar whole bar. So this is nothing but A multiplied B double bar plus A multiplied B double bar. So which is A multiplied B plus A multiplied B, and which is again nothing but AB. I hope it is clear. I have just used the rules that we have studied in Boolean algebra. So can you see this is nothing but the AND gate. Now for the OR gate, so here we have A, we can use three NAND gates. So A and A here, the output here will be A times A bar. So here we have A times A bar, and A times A, if you remember, A times A is nothing but A bar, right? And here we have B, here we have B, so here we'll get B times B bar. So here we have B times B bar, which is nothing but B bar. So here output will be A bar multiplied with B bar whole bar, which is A double bar plus B double bar by De Morgan's theorem, and that will be A plus B. So can you see, by using three NAND gate we can form a OR gate, right? So now let us see the NOR gate. NOR gate, right? So NOR is what? It is a OR gate followed by a NOT gate. Like this. So we have A, B, and let's say the output is X. So A, B, and X. So if A is 0, B is 0, we will get 0. If A is 1, B, 0 and 0 will get 1, sorry, not 0. If A is 1, B is 0, we will get 0. If A is 0, B is 1, we'll get 0. If A is 1, B is 1, we'll get 0. So can you see the signals have been inverted by this NOT gate? And we can also show this gate with a OR gate with a circle. A, B, and X. Okay, now let us see how we can convert NOR gate into AND, OR, and NOT gate. So can you see if we connect the inputs like this, we will get the output as of a NOT gate. Now if we connect three NOR gates together like this, the output will be AND gate. If we connect two NOR gates like this, the output will be OR gate. Okay, I think these Boolean calculation is quite, Boolean arithmetic is quite easy to understand. So just remember, right? So 3 NOR gate gives you 1 AND gate, but in case of a NAND gate, 2 NAND gate gives you AND gate. So do remember these. Okay, so if I want to make a AND gate by using diodes, then we can connect diodes like this. There is a battery and there are two diodes which are connected like this. A and B are the inputs and X is the output. So we are taking output from here. So let us see how this circuit gives us the AND gate. So let us understand this. So I'm starting from a low signal. Let us say if A is 0, B is 0. So we can say the N side is connected to the low potential. So both the diodes will be forward biased. If both the diodes are forward biased, let us say here the voltage is 0 and here the voltage is 5 volts. If it is forward biased, what would happen? So there will be a current supplied by the battery, and this current will flow like this. So the current will flow through both the diodes. If current is flowing, there will be a potential drop across the resistance R. So there is a potential drop due to which the voltage at this point will be less than 5 volts. If you are getting voltage less than 5 volts, we are getting a low signal. If it is a low signal, the output is low. So we can say A, B, X. If A is 0, B is 0, we are getting a low signal. Now, if I change the input, let us say this is 1 and this is 0. In that case, the N side is connected to the high potential. So we can say the diode D1 will be reverse biased, but the diode D2 will remain forward biased. So the current in this case will flow like this only through the diode D2. But still there is a current through the resistor, so there will be a potential drops across the resistor. So the output will be low. So if it is 1 and B is 0, we'll get 0. Similarly, if A is 0, B is 1, the diode D2 will become uh, reverse biased, right? And diode D1 will become forward biased. So again, we'll get a low output. But what happens if both the inputs are high? If both the inputs are high, then both the diodes will be reverse biased. If both the diodes are reverse biased, in that case, there will be no current supplied by the battery. So the voltage at the output will be nothing but 5 volts. So we can say we are having a high voltage. So 1 will get 1. So that we have to remember. So if we have two diodes which are connected like this and there is no battery, now this circuit will behave like a OR gate. Now let us see how it is behaving like a OR gate. So let us say A and B are our inputs and we are taking output from this point. So we'll calling our output as X. Now let us say both the inputs are at low. We have no inputs. So A, B and X. So A is low, B is low. If A is low and B is low, both these diodes will be reverse biased because P side is connected to the low potential. If that is the case, we can say there will be no current, right? So it will be non-conducting. So the voltage at the output will be same as the 0 volts. So here we are getting 0 volts. So we are getting a low signal. So it will be 0. But now suppose if we make A as high and B as low. So now the diode D1 will be forward biased. If it is forward biased, then you can see it becomes conducting. If it becomes conducting, then we can say the potential at A will be same as the potential at X. So at A we have a high potential or we have a high input. So we'll get a high output, right? Because now the output is directly connected with the input and which input is high. So when A is 1, B is 0, we'll get a high output. Similarly, if A is low, B is high, we'll get a high output. But if suppose both the inputs are low, sorry, yes, high, so 1 and 1. So both the diodes will be forward biased and we will get a high output because now both the inputs are connected with the output directly. So 1 will get 1, right? So can you see the output? It is basically for a OR gate. When if any of the input is high, then we have a high output. I think this concept is clear, right? How we can look for, like suppose if this diagram is given in the exam, I think now you'll be able to figure out that this is a OR gate. And if this diagram is given in the exam, then you know this is a AND gate. Okay, now let us see some illustrations. Now in this question, we have given a circuit and we have to find which gate this diagram represents. So can you see there is an LED and at one end of the LED we have a 6 volts, at the other end it is grounded, so we have 0 volts. And if the switch is open, it is a low signal. If the switch is closed, we have a high signal. So let us draw the truth table in this case. So A, B, and let us say Y is the output. So if both the switches are open, then can you see the current will flow through the LED. If the current is flowing through the LED, the output will be high. Now, if let us say A is closed and B is open, so A is high and B is low, in that case, there will be no change. The current will still keep flowing in the LED and we'll get a high output. If A is low and B is high, again, we will get the same scenario. The LED will glow. But suppose if both the switches are closed, in that case, what would happen? Now what we have done, so we have short circuited the LED. So whatever current supplied from by the source, that current will pass through the connecting wires to the ground. So when both the switches are closed, then there will be no current in the LED. So we'll be having a low reading, so or low output. Now, right, so it will be low. So can you tell me what type of a gate it is? It is just a inverse of AND gate. So it is NAND. Can you see? When both the inputs are high, the output is low. So this is NAND gate. Now let us see this question. So in the combination of the following gates, the output Y can be written in terms of input A and B. Okay, so let us do this with Boolean algebra. So we have given, this is AND gate, this is again AND gate, this is OR, and this is NOT, right? This is NOT. So we have A here and A bar here, right? Here we have B bar, here we have B. Now A and B bar, when these are the inputs to the AND gate, we will get A multiplied with B bar. Here we get A bar multiplied with B. Now we feed this signal to the OR gate. So we'll get A multiplied B bar plus B multiplied with A bar. So you can clearly see that option B is the right answer. Okay, now let us see the next question. Sometimes you will get a question where the input waveform will be given to you and the output waveform will be given to you. Accordingly, you have to figure out which gate it is. So for example, if I see the square waveform of the input A, so this means 0, this means 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. Similarly for B, this is 0, this is 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. Now let us see the output waveform. 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So if you look this waveforms closely, what we can say, when if any of the input is high, we are getting a high output. For 1, 1 it is 1, for 0, 1 it is 1. But if both the inputs are low, we are getting a low output. So what type of a gate it is? It will be OR gate. Got it? Right. So let us see one more question. So so we have given two inputs and one output, and we have to figure out what type of output we will get for 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 0, 1. So let us do this with Boolean algebra. So this is A. So here we have A, here we have A, here we have B and B, right? So at this output of this NAND gate, we will get A times B bar. At this, we'll get A plus B. Now we are feeding, so here we have A multiplied B bar. Here we have A multiplied with B bar. Here we have A plus B. So here we'll get, now this is an AND gate, so it will be A plus B multiplied with A B bar. Now we are feeding this to this NOR gate. So here we'll get A B bar plus A plus B multiplied with A B bar whole bar, right? Because it's a NOR gate. But let us simplify this. So we can take A B bar common. So it can be written as A B bar common. So we have 1 plus A plus B whole bar, right? So can you see in this factor, we have 1 plus A plus B. So we know that if any of the input is 1 in case of an OR gate, then the result is high. So if this is high, so the result will be high. So we can replace this with 1. So we will get A dot B bar times 1. And we know that if we multiply any input with high, we will get a high output. So it will be AB bar whole bar. So there will be double bar here. And this is nothing but AB, right? And AB is what? That is the AND gate. So if it is AND gate, for 1 0, we will get 0. For 0 0 we'll get 0. For 1 1 we'll get 1. For 0 1 we'll get 0. So it will be option A. I hope the concept is clear. Now, if we solve this question by using the values, that is again a very easy approach. So let us put 0 and 0. So here we'll get 0, 0. Here we get 0, 0. For NAND gate, it will be 1. So it will get 1, 1. So here we'll get 0. So here we'll get 0. So 1, 0 we are feeding to the NOR gate. So it will become 0. So can you see for 0, 0, we are getting 0. So like this we can check for other values, and we'll get option A as the answer. So you can use any approach in the exam. Okay, now let us see one more case. So can you see what type of a operation it is? So can you so here we have diodes, right? Like this. So this combination is what? It is OR gate that we have studied. And if there is a transistor, this is AND. This is NOT. So it is nothing but NOR. And what is a NOR gate? It is A plus B bar, and it can be written as A bar times B bar. So option D, that is the answer.
If you find videos of this series useful, so it is highly recommended for you to join PragBiz revision program. So in this program, we're going to cover 10 blocks in 10 weeks, and we'll give you a target of 1 chapter per day, and we'll be able to cover all relevant chapters by the first attempt of JEE Mains. And how you can join this revision program? By clicking on the link given in the description. And one more thing you can do, please drop a comment. Let us know what else we can do for you to make this series better. Thank you.